And welcome to episode 486 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Andrew Swafford.
Nadine Smith.
Michael O'Malley.
In today's episode, we will be continuing our M. Night Shyamalan series with 2004's The Village. And before that, we're going to cover movies that we saw this week in part one. But yeah, The Village. The Village has an interesting history behind it.
I'm curious to hear about that.
Yeah. It has a whole, like, people were, like, the script got leaked and, like, got stolen and then leaked and then pre-reviewed. It's got some thoughts on, like, people need to chill out a little bit with movies, maybe.
Yeah. That had to be one of the early movies that had that cycle of leak, fan reaction, official release.
Yeah.
True. Early internet.
Yeah.
But let's go ahead. We got a bunch of movies that we want to talk about in this first part. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into it with one of the reasons I watched it is because it's a Cinematary fave. And that is The Empty Man from 2020. Yeah.
Yeah.
Came out during the pandemic.
Yeah.
For those uninitiated, The Empty Man is directed by David Pryor, and it follows a retired cop who is asked by his friend to investigate the disappearance of her daughter, who seemed to just kind of leave in the middle of the night, but she left a ominous message on the bathroom mirror that said, "The empty man made me do it." And as this cop named James, as he continues to investigate deeper and deeper into her disappearance, he starts to, begin to see and hear strange things related to the empty man, but also falls deeper and deeper into this web of this cult that is practicing, like, on the outskirts of this. I guess, like, outside St. Louis is where this is supposed to be set, with some scenes in St. Louis. So
Cult Central.
St. Louis, Missouri. Yeah, I hadn't watched this. I know it, especially the people and the folks in this episode watched it a number of times since it was released in 2020. I'm sure y'all can speak a little bit more to, like, it's very strange. It's very strange, like, conception into release, thanks to Disney and Fox and some other factors. But I watched this one because I thought it was really funny that it was on Disney Plus.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that just kind of made me laugh, like, among, like, Disney animated classics and Inside Out 2 and other various Disney products. It was just like Empty Man 2020. I was like, that sounds funny. Just the
Whenever I can't watch the computer wore tennis shoes, I watch The Empty Man.
Exactly. But I was glad that I watched it when I did. I've been doing, after we saw Cloud, the latest Kiyoshi Kurosawa movie at TIFF, I've been going back and watching a number of his movies. I've seen Cure and I've seen Pulse. And then I have a couple others saved that are on Criterion Collection now. And this very much feels like in line with that. Like, this is a movie. I liked it because it's not like a jump scare central. It's not sitting there just trying to get you a lot of the times. It's just kind of, just has this very ominous, haunting, like, was something they talk about a lot in the movie, brain itching, scariness.
It's kind of hypnotic.
Yeah,
you feel like you're being sucked into it.
Yeah, because honestly, like, a lot, like, through the movie, while I was watching the movie, I kind of was, like, at times struggling with it, and, like, in a way that it was like, it wasn't, like, grippy. It didn't feel like it was gripping me, but at the same time, I just, like, couldn't look away, And it was one of those that, like, it ended, and, like, if I, like, was one of those, like, Letterboxd people who just, like, immediately reviewed it after it ended.
There is a great Letterboxd, like, pithy review. I forget the name of the writer. Emma Stefanski or something like that wrote, "I hope this does not happen to me."
True.
Relatable.
But it was one that like immediately after watching it, like I was like, oh, okay, like this was good. But that was like I forgot what day it was. It was like Saturday. And I've been thinking about it every day since then, just because it has so many
Your
just
brain's itching.
yeah, just so many different layers of like just sequences that stick with me, whether it's just and it's a lot of stuff where the camera's like just static and you're just kind of like staring at maybe like some empty woods or like an alleyway, or like I'm thinking like right now about when James is like in his house and he's just like staring at like the little walkway between his bedroom and the door.
Yeah.
And like the first couple times there's not like he kind of you hear stuff but there's nothing, you don't really see anything until like you finally do see something, and it really gets you just because you've been like sitting there staring at that for longer than you kind of want the camera to really linger there, because it gets this a lot of times in this movie the camera lingers and you're kind of like, and you're like, for me, like I'm prepped for some sort of like jump scare and it never really comes, and but it also, you also just, the longer it stays, the more like my imagination is coming up with more frightening things than really what's going to appear on screen. But at the same time, there's a lot of frightening sequences. The sequence when he's like searching around the camp, one, I'm like, why are you,
that's so scary.
that is the scariest part.
like, why are you in this deserted camp and it's nighttime? Like, yeah, like just come on. And when he's in the cabin, it's frightening. But then like I don't like the part where they're all the cultists and they just start moving in unison.
Yeah,
I don't
that is
like
the
that.
single like gif that plays of that movie in my head when I think about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that I don't like that at all. That makes
them like marching in a circle around a fire and like making it spiral into the sky.
Well, no, once they like notice him and then walking in unison toward him,
take like a single step forward.
I'm like, this is like a dream I've had that I don't like. But no, it's one, and it's one, and this is why I'm kind of curious to toss it over to y'all. I don't think I got much on this first viewing, and I don't say that as like it's a bad thing. It's like I think I need to watch this again to like fully like kind of feel what this movie is trying to present. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I would say so. I think it's also a very long movie, like, and it's kind of like a trope to complain about how long movies are these days. But I think this is like a movie that really uses its length to its advantage, because it's not like it's, as much as it's a very patient movie, it's also a movie that feels very dense and layered and kind of hard to follow in a lot of ways, which I think is like the Kurosawa like connection as well. But like it is like a massive feeling movie, and I think it's totally fair to like not have completely grasped it the first time, even though it's like on a moment by moment basis, not especially challenging in like a experimental way, but as a completed whole, it's kind of a lot to take in.
Well, it jumps genres quite a bit. Like it starts as this like teen urban legend.
Yeah, you get like this 20-minute prologue.
There's also that. Sorry, it doesn't start as a teen urban legend movie. It starts as like this really intense like cabin fever movie. And then we kind of like, we're in there for like 20 minutes until you realize like, oh, that was the prologue of the movie that I'm watching.
And then it jumped 25 years to small town Missouri.
Absolutely.
From the Himalayas.
Then we're in the teen urban legend territory, and then we like very gradually fade into cosmic horror. Like the point at which you are now watching a cosmic horror movie is a little bit hard to pin down. And so it does kind of feel like multiple movies all kind of like packed into one in a way that I could see other people taking issue with, like, oh, this movie doesn't know what it is. They're trying to do too many things. But I don't know. I think the kind of like expansiveness of the movie, the idea of like your own sense of like what exactly it is you're watching kind of like moving out from under you is a major part of what makes this work.
Yeah, no, I would agree, because just it kind of like every step of the way, I'm just like, now where are we at now?
Yeah.
Like, why is Stephen Root here? I'm happy because I love Stephen Root, but
that's
like,
a great scene.
Yeah. No, I like that's why I say like it's just you kind of just keep like going deeper and deeper and deeper and
Yeah.
deeper, and it's kind of like when's this gonna stop? But also like, well, then what's gonna happen next? I don't like the movie ended, and I was like, oh, well, I felt like we probably could have gone 8 more layers into this thing.
Yeah. I've watched this movie with people just like in my life on many occasions, and like almost always it's the exact same experience where like the minute that they finish it, they're like, I don't know about that. And then
Yeah.
like a week later, they're like, I'm thinking about the Empty Man, and then we end up getting back together to rewatch it.
I think it's like a rare movie that I immediately rewatched the day after I watched it for the first time because I just like couldn't.
Yeah.
It I feel like it is about, you know, the brain itching. It sort of infects you a little bit similarly.
Yes.
I feel like it's also worth mentioning like David Pryor's background is like he
Yeah.
worked a lot with David Fincher and specifically like did like behind the scenes featurettes for like several of David Fincher's movies.
Not just Fincher too. He also I think he did one on Llewyn Davis. He like maybe worked on in the behind the scenes of Llewyn Davis. And also like got into the film industry by being asked to make like some Blu-ray box set like bonus feature disc of Alien. And so like and he was asked because like he was just kind of considered among his circle of film industry people like the biggest alien nerd in the world. So like he definitely seems to me like somebody who like studies great filmmakers and has gotten a chance to do so like 5 feet away from them.
I think it just has that kind of like the sort of slick digital veneer of like a Fincher movie. There is something sort of like Gone Girl-esque about the setting and even kind of the protagonist just sort of being this like blank like stand-in for just sort of like masculinity, you know, like um and but then it kind of reveals itself to be, I don't know, something more like Richard Kelly-esque almost. And just like it, you know, it's not something where you need to like understand these like specific points of world building, but there is like a mythology that kind of reveals itself.
Oh, yeah.
And I think, Andrew, what you said about the way it changes genres is like really I think what stood out to me so much is that it just really like sort of like for the protagonist in the movie, reality is sort of just constantly like becoming destabilized. I think the movie sort of does that with you too, where it's just like kind of mutating in front of your eyes and becoming something like totally different. Also like characters in it just like say really crazy things. Like I love the line, "You can't indict the cosmos." It's just amazing. Like it's got kind of a Shyamalan thing where there's like sort of an off-kilter sense of humor.
Yeah.
It's a pretty funny. I was gonna say like
It's
it's
very
worth mentioning. It's a pretty funny
even
movie.
That dude has a great like nope face. He just he just responds to situations as if he was like just the most normal guy in the world.
Even the scene with like all the cult members walking in unison, like that's honestly kind of funny to me.
Yeah,
like,
it is, and like he just kind of goes like, nope, nope,
Yeah.
just like runs off, and I'm like, yeah, like that's how I would just be like, nope, I'm out. See ya.
That the teens in the movie go to Jacques Derrida High School.
Yeah.
So good, so good.
I think too, like
Attention to
the
detail.
Shyamalan connection is interesting because like a lot of Shyamalan movies, like early on, like maybe up until The Village, it has the kind of veneer of a puzzle movie where once you can fit the pieces together, you get this kind of aha moment. But what like the really interesting thing about some of the Shyamalan movies, as well as Empty Man, is fitting the pieces together. Like it's almost like a false aha because like once the pieces are together, it feels as if things have been revealed to you. But what you're really looking at instead of like a picture is a whole, and like it just like it's like the bottom collapsing out of you. Like I don't know, it's like a weird like false sense of like understanding, which I think like people have pointed to like Fincher's Zodiac as that, like the kind of limits of like human understanding, like, you know, the Zodiac killer case is like running up against. And I think that this movie takes that idea and just kind of like runs with it. Like, what if the very fabric of reality were unknowable?
Well, it feels kind of like a religious horror movie in a way, you know, but most religious horror movies are about like Catholic mythology, you know, demons and Satan and things like that. But this feels like a Buddhist horror movie or like a Taoist horror movie or something. Like the idea that like everything is connected and like we are all this, you know, a part of this one larger whole called the universe, and the goal is to kind of like transcend yourself to kind of be at one with it, is like presented here as a kind of a horrifying proposition, right?
Yeah. I recommend people check it out. It's on Disney Plus. It's also on Hulu.
Also, David Pryor got to make an hour-long kind of feature as part of Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities.
Oh, The Autopsy.
Called The Autopsy.
That rules.
That is extremely good. Zach, you should watch The Autopsy if you still got the David Pryor itch in the brain.
I guess so. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Well, cool. A movie that at least for me just recently came out in the theaters, but I know Andrew, you caught it at TIFF, is Rumours, which is the latest film from Guy Madden, noted Canadian wild guy. Rumours. So the plot of this is that you have the seven at the annual G7 summit. So you have, you know, the 7 leaders of the world's wealthiest liberal democracies, and they're at this chateau in Germany, and they're gonna like the whole reason they're there also is to draft a provisional statement regarding a global crisis that's never like they never say like, oh, it's climate change, or oh, it's like a war. It's like they never say. It's just like a unnamed global crisis, and they have to come up with this provisional statement. And I also
just
find
a statement, like it's not policy. It's just
no,
like,
it's
everything's gonna be okay, something. People of Earth.
Exactly, but they're trying to figure out the best way to say that. I also like that they're meeting in like this gazebo just in the middle of like the yard in the chateau, and like that's where they're gonna do this provisional statement like work. But you have actors like Kate Blanchett, who's playing the Chancellor of Germany. You have Denis Minochet, who most people would know as the dairy farmer from the beginning of Inglourious Bastards, playing the president of France. You have hilariously Charles Dance playing the president of the United States while also never having an American accent. He just talks like he's Charles Dance, which is occasionally commented on. I feel like could have been commented on more because it is pretty. Just the nature of that is just a joke in itself.
And it's like not exactly a Biden joke, but he does fall asleep at one point.
Yeah, it's at one point he's like, I'm gonna go to sleep now, and they're like, no. And he's like, no, just no, just let me sleep. Yeah. I don't know who the actor is who plays the Prime Minister of Canada, but he's kind of like if there's a lead character, I would say he's probably the one that they kind of focus on the most. Alicia Vikander shows up very briefly. In
Canada is Roy Dupuis.
Yeah,
he's a Guy Madden collaborator. He was in the Forbidden Room.
Oh, cool. Yeah, he has one line that just made me laugh, where they're just like, he just loves smart women, and he's like, I love smart women. I love them too much. Yeah. So this is so anyway, so like they're having to draft this statement. But naturally, or not naturally, but just something happens. Like something takes place. Like all of the people, all of their helpers, all of the people around them have disappeared. they're just alone in this gazebo outside of the chateau in Germany. They don't.
A giant brain is discovered in the woods.
Yeah, they find this giant brain, and they find Alicia Vikander like speaking to the brain, and they think she's speaking in some gibberish pig Latin language, and they're like trying to guess which dead language she's speaking in, and then Kate Blanchett's like, I think she's just speaking Swedish, and it's a movie. I know, Andrew, you enjoyed it as well out of TIFF. I enjoyed it. It's a deeply inconsistent comedy because it kind of sometimes you kind of just slows down to a point where you're just like, where is this kind of going? But then it always finds a way to like re-energize you with something silly. The one I was texting Andrew about was there's a point where it's kind of slowing down, and then they're introduced, like their phones haven't been working this entire time, and then the Prime Minister of Canada's phone beeps, and it's somebody saying that they're like a 7-year-old girl who's trying to find her mother and father, and they're like, who is this? And Kate Blanchett's like, oh my gosh, this is the AI chatbot that's going to be that they unveiled they're going to use to like identify sex predators and pedophiles. And it's like it's gained sentience and is like reaching out to you, and what happens is when you like allow it to realize that you're a pedophile, like it'll send the authorities. So like, let's pretend to be a pedophile.
They have to find the perfect happy medium between sounding flirtatious, like they're flirting with this 7-year-old, but not outright pedophiles.
Yeah, and they're just like, so every time he's like texting, he like texts something, and they're like, but also say like, I'm really glad you're talking to me, which is great. I like once that showed up, I was like, all right, like I'm back on board now. That was after Charles Dance, as the president of the United States, said, I'm just gonna go to sleep, just leave me be, like let me lay here, and just finds a tree and lays down and sleeps. Yeah, I would say like none of the characters I feel like are like, it's not like it's them doing some political leader. It's more just like general stereotypes.
They're all just like neoliberals. They're all like ideologically like indistinguishable from each other, but also that's partially because they're unwilling to share their own beliefs in any meaningful way. So you can't tell who disagrees with who on what.
Yeah, there's a great bit where the president of France is like talking about how all like everybody's like aligned with like what their personalities are and what people associate with their countries are. And so like at one point, Kate Blanchett's character is like kind of reacting to something and getting dramatic, and he's just like writing down like, Germany is getting dramatic right now. We've seen this before. Yeah, I don't know. I'll be honest, this is the first Guy Mad movie I've ever seen.
I don't think it's a very representative of what he usually does.
I feel like it's probably not. But I was entertained. I think at the end of the day, I kind of wish it had a little bit more, but overall, I thought it was a good time. Andrew, what did you think of it out of TIFF?
Oh, I'm fuzzy on it at this point, though I do need to write about it here soon. But I remember thinking it was pretty consistently funny all the way through. It definitely has slower sections, I guess. Partially because like the plot isn't really going anywhere. It's just these characters kind of like stuck. And it's almost like a Louis Buñuel plot or something like that, where like they can't leave the G7 or something.
Kinda, yeah.
But I appreciate that for what it is, even though it's not like the most conventionally paced comedy. I also just think it's very politically prescient. Like a lot of discourse in recent weeks leading up to the 2024 election has kind of revolved around like, what does Kamala Harris believe? Who is she as a politician, right? Because, the way that she presented herself as soon as she kind of became the candidate was very different from the way she presented herself in 2020 when she ran, and is also kind of different from the way that she's presenting herself now. And it's not like I'm saying people should not vote for Kamala Harris. I think that is like the thing you got to do if you're in a swing state. But I think that this movie very perfectly captures for me the idea that like people on a certain level of politics are simply like playing the game of like trying to get one step higher or kind of maintain their own power to the point where like, of course, they're just going to support the status quo, like whatever the status quo is. There's like not really space for a lot of like ideological sincerity in these circles,
Yeah,
and it's crazy that there's just a comedy about that idea.
You have like the Prime Minister of Canada who's constantly trying to like come up with like the profound thing that will just sway the masses.
Yeah.
And then you have like Charles Dance as the president of the US who's just like, nobody even cares what we say in these things. Just write something and then like we'll go and have dinner.
Right. Which is true. Like no one will read it.
Yeah, I don't know. If it's playing around you, I recommend seeing it. I think it's good. But yeah, it's not, if you're expecting something like The Death of Stalin, where it's just kind of like wisecracks and like these like wild embellishments of stuff, I'm like, no, it's a little bit more subtle than that. But it's also, I find like entertaining. I mean, they have the it's the president, I don't know whatever of Italy, who just pulls meat out of his suit and is like handing people like salamis at one point in the movie. And they're just like, I'm so glad you're around, Antonio. We wouldn't have survived without this meat. But yeah, Rumours, check it out. Andrew, I'm gonna toss it over to you.
Sure. I'll just stump for one small weird horror movie that I kind of like took on faith from other people I trust was going to be a good time. I was told not to look anything up about this movie, and I suppose I would say that's a good idea for other people as well, though maybe that oversold like quite how strange it is. The movie is Oddity, by the director Damian McCarthy. I think he's only made one other feature before this, Caveat. Have not seen that. But this, as the title suggests, is a strange little movie. It is a big spooky location film, which, one of my favorite subgenres of horror, the big spooky location film. And it initially is about a woman and her husband moving into this enormous, perfectly square house with like this big, almost like Spanish like open air garden in the middle of it. Like it is just kind of like the outline of a house. And very soon into the movie, a murder takes place. And then we kind of jump pretty far into the future, several years in the future. Now we're in the house with just the husband and his new girlfriend, because the former wife has been murdered. I probably should have just said that instead of trying to obscure it. But really the plot of this kicks off when you learn that the recently deceased wife has a twin sister who has like psychic abilities of some sort, and she kind of invites herself over and begins kind of investigating her sister's death. And I don't want to say a whole lot more than that because the movie is very strange, and I don't know, the uniqueness of it, I think, is part of the appeal. It is not like the scariest movie in the world. It is the plot is very much like restricts itself to a pretty tight boundary, both like literal and just kind of like narratively speaking. But it has some pretty unnerving stuff in it, including this like construction of like a fake human that you'll see if you look up this movie on Letterboxd, both in like the banner image and in the poster. Just like this big, like humanoid figure like carved out of wood, with no hair and with like a mouth that is like constantly gaping open, like it's screaming at you. And like just the presence of that thing in the movie is quite disturbing. And the extent to which you just have to spend time with this thing is unpleasant in kind of a fun, spooky way. And I think that like spooky is maybe the best term that I have for this. I think this is a great like spooky season watch. It's not like super violent. It's not super intense. It's just like a spooky little chiller. Doesn't have like particularly grand ambitions, but it is trying to do something small and unique and cool. And I think it pulls it off very well. So I don't have a whole lot more to say about other than that, other than, you know, it's good. People should go watch it. I watched it by renting it on Amazon. It is also on like Apple TV, Google Play, etc. But would be a good watch before the October season is over.
Yeah. Before we head into part 2, Michael, do you want to talk a little bit about Halloween since we're in spooky season?
Yeah, 'tis the season. I'll be quick, but I watched the 2 Rob Zombie Halloween movies, which I think at one point were fairly reviled, but at this point, everyone who hated them, I think, has mostly forgotten about them, and they've been reclaimed as kind of, 21st century horror masterpieces. At least, especially the second one, I think people really tend to like. And I went into these having watched, most of the other Halloween movies, which, like a lot of like those iconic horror franchises, are movies are mostly like tedious, I thought, after a point. Although obviously the initial one by John Carpenter is a classic, and there's a few other good ones in there, but mostly it's tedious. And so it was kind of weird to me to go to these Rob Zombie remakes. Like the first one is 2007, which is a remake of the John Carpenter Halloween. And this is just a few years after, some of the worst Halloween movies that are in the like mainline franchise. And it's wild to me how much people hated this, because it's not as if the Halloween movies were good. And Rob Zombie is coming in doing something radically different from those movies, and people hated it. And I don't know. I mean, I suppose there's a fatigue setting in with like horror remakes, which were happening at the time. And, there was probably like a kind of reflexive, like anti-Rob Zombie feeling, with his association with, I don't know, he's kind of new metal adjacent. And like, that was kind of like, not really super loved at the time or whatever. I don't know, whatever the reasons for it. I can't really comprehend why people like resoundingly rejected. And by people, I mean critics mostly, but I also remember like friends of mine in high school, and I was in high school when this came out, and like friends of mine being like, yeah, it was okay. I don't know. I thought it was good. The first one kind of notoriously, or I think greatly, spends its first like 30 or 40 minutes just detailing Michael Myers' childhood, which would sound like it would be super deflating. Because one of the things about Michael Myers is how unknowable he is, but it rocks. Like it's like easily the best part of the movie is the Michael Myers backstory.
It's because it's the part of the movie with his wife in it.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay, yeah. So Sherry Moon Zombie, that's her name, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's in both
Wife
movies.
guy.
The second one, she's like this weird, like ethereal presence. In the first movie, she's a real person, and she is Michael Myers' mom, who has this like awful like husband who's not Michael Myers' dad. But this husband is like, these two are kind of like the yin and yang of like the Rob Zombie films, right? So like the mom is this kind of like rough talking, but ultimately kind of like a charming person, whereas the dad is like, maybe like the worst version of like a white like working class male that you could like conjure, right? Like he's like super homophobic all the time, and like a big thread in the early parts of the movie is like all this like homophobic language just being like blasted at Michael Myers, who is like kind of androgynous. He's got like long hair, doesn't seem to present super like into like, guy stuff. And in fact, he's mostly interested in wearing like Halloween masks, because of foreshadowing. And like, I don't know, I kind of go back and forth on like the whole Rob Zombie thing about how like, look at these white trash people, aren't they repulsive? But don't you kind of like them? Like, I don't know. I kind of go back and forth on that because sometimes I think it's kind of sticky at times, I think, but I think it works pretty well here, especially because of like the central performance by the kid who plays like young Michael Myers, who's extremely good. I'm blanking on the name right now, but like basically you see him like being verbally abused and physically abused by like everyone in his life except his mom, who is like, you know, this kind of she's a like a erotic dancer, stripper, something like that, and she's just like can't give him the time or attention he needs, but she obviously cares about him. But like you just see this poor kid who's like clearly very troubled because he's like, it's opening the movie with him like killing his pet rat. But you just see him slowly. Nadine, I read your review that you did for Cinematary quite some time ago with Mike Thorne, and I think that you mentioned that like it's less of an origin story and more of like a hollowing out of a person that you get to see, because like eventually like the child Michael Myers like massacres his whole family except for the baby who becomes Laurie Strode later on, like in the original series. And you just watch him like slowly retreat into himself because there's a long sequence when he's like institutionalized in like a hospital, like a mental hospital, where Dr. Loomis, who is played by Malcolm McDowell, comes in and is like trying to treat him, but Malcolm McDowell is also like using him to create this like true crime book. And you just see this, I don't know, it should be like deflating to see Michael Myers explained, but all it really does is show you the descent into Michael Myers, which in some ways doesn't feel like an explanation. It feels just like this horrible, like lurch into like the abyss, more so than it feels like a backstory. And it's really good. That aspect of the movie is really good. I think like the back half of the movie is mostly a pretty straightforward remake of the Halloween, like John Carpenter movie until the very end when it kind of takes a left turn, but and becomes sad again because Michael Myers is like hunting for Laurie Strode, which is like the last remnant of his family, and he keeps having like visions of his mother and stuff. But overall, it's like very sad, overwhelmingly sad, and I think that goes for the second one too, Halloween 2, which is kind of sort of a remake of the Halloween 2 originally. From the 80s, like it opens a hospital, like there's a kind of famous hospital sequence in the original Halloween 2, but mostly it's like a movie about how much it would suck to be Laurie Strode and survive a massacre like what Michael Myers has done in the original Halloween. And like Laurie Strode and Michael Myers become this like cosmically entangled, like just cycle of misery where like because of Michael Myers' like inability to find any real like connection in the world, like an inability to like find any true humanity, like continues to hunt her almost like instinctually, and she, by being hunted by Michael Myers, continues to be like forced into these traumatic situations until it just like spirals into just this like really like I've heard people compare it to like Fire Walk with Me, and it does have that feeling of like what is happening is so horrific that there's almost like a break from reality where things become ethereally horrific in a way that is like deeply sad. And also like, you just can't, it doesn't feel like there's any way you can claw your way out of like what is happening. And I don't know, you know, I don't know why people weren't more into these movies at the time. It seems to be totally in line with, well, maybe it is. It does make sense. I mean, people didn't really like the Hostel movies either, which I think these like kind of share some like weird DNA with. Or people kind of hated Fire Walk with Me too, I guess, when it came out. So I don't know. It just, I don't know. With hindsight, it feels like people got it wrong, and it's weird to try to piece together why people hated them. But they're good. If you have a chance to go watch these Rob Zombie Halloween movies, it's a good feel bad experience.
People are wrong. I think that's going to be the theme for the rest of this episode.
Yeah, people are wrong. It's interesting why they're wrong though, and there's probably, I'm sure there's writing out there about like critics and audiences' relationship to horror in the 2000s, which I think is like a uniquely interesting time for horror movies.
Yeah, for sure.
And produce some uniquely weird and interesting reactions to movies. So I don't know.
I think there's like a whole generation of people who like in their head, horror is just like The Grudge and The Ring and Saw and stuff like that. You know?
But there's equally like there's like a reaction to that where there's a whole generation of people who like reflexively hate those movies.
That's
like,
what I'm saying. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
People who like won't watch horror at all because they think that that's all horror is.
We're gonna get into this in part 2. We'll save it. We
got it. Okay.
The twist.
The twist is we're gonna save it until part 2. All right, we're gonna take a quick break and then we'll be back talking The Village after this.
Okay, I'm gonna go grab some water.
And we're back with part 2 of episode 486 of Cinematary. In this part, we're going to be continuing our M. Night Shyamalan series with 2004's The Village. Written and directed by Shyamalan, the film stars Joaquin Phoenix, Bryce Dallas Howard, Adrian Brody, William Hurt, Sigourney Weaver, and Brendan Gleeson. An Amish-style community lives cut off from the outside world by the woods in which they believe dangerous creatures exist. They have an uneasy truce with the creatures. If they stay out of the woods, they are left unharmed. When one of the young villagers becomes ill, the boy who loves her ignores the elders of the village to make a bid to the next town to fetch medicine. That's not what happens. You lied to me, Wikipedia. How dare you? The film was originally titled The Woods, but the name was changed because a film in production by director Lucky McKee, The Woods, which was released in 2006, already had that title. Like other Shyamalan productions, the film had high levels of secrecy surrounding it to protect the expected twist ending that became a Shyamalan trademark. Despite that, the script was stolen over a year before the film was released, prompting many, quote, pre-reviews of the film on several internet film sites and much fan speculation about plot details. On people looking for the twist, William Hurt said, quote, "It isn't the story twist that actually grabs you. What grabs you is something a lot deeper. It says a lot. The film says a lot about community. It says a lot about fear. It says a lot about how parents want to keep their children loved and safe. How we are valiantly trying to find lesser fears with which to prevent greater ones, and how we carry those scars with us and they reinvent themselves." The village set in the film was built in its entirety in one field outside Chadds Ford, Pennsylvania. An adjacent field contained an on-location temporary soundstage. Production on the film started in October 2003 with delays because some scenes needing fall foliage could not be shot until the late fall season. Because of a late fall season, principal photography wrapped in mid-December of that year. But in April and May of the following year, several of the lead actors were called back to set. Reports noted that this seemed to have something to do with a change to the film's ending. And in fact, the film's final ending differs from the ending in a stolen version of the script that surfaced a year earlier. The script version ends with after Ivy climbs over the wall and gets help from a truck driver, while the film version has Ivy meeting a park ranger in scenes where she returns to the village. On why he wanted to tell a story set during, or at least, appearing in this time period, Shyamalan said, quote, "People left the towns in the 1880s and 1890s because of industrialization. We're fed up with the corruption and the filth and everything starting to happen in the cities, and they went to go do their own thing and move to areas that weren't inhabited. But what if something bad happened? There's just no real way to completely protect someone. There's just no way. You always are at risk. It's a scary thing to admit. You can do everything you can, but your loved ones will always be in jeopardy." The New York Times in 2004 said the ubiquitous advertisements for the village promised that nothing can prepare you. Nothing, that is, except M. Night Shyamalan's last 3 movies and a passing acquaintance with the Twilight Zone. It is hard to think of another filmmaker so utterly committed to the predictable manufacture of narrative surprise. But his mastery of classic suspense movie framing and cutting is as impressive as ever. And the sound design, which layers James Newton Howard's spooky score with the equally sinister sounds of the forest, is impressive, especially when it evokes Ivy's blindness. At times, you do sit up in your chair and crane your neck as if you could see around the next bend of the story and glimpse what's coming. Then you do see it, you burst out laughing. In 2004, Roger Ebert said, "The Village is a colossal miscalculation, a movie based on a premise that cannot support it, a premise so transparent it would be laughable were the movie not so deadly solemn. It's a flimsy excuse for a plot with characters who move below the one-dimensional and inner flatland." M. Night Shyamalan, the writer-director, has been successful in evoking horror from minimalist stories as in Signs, which if you think about it rationally is absurd, but you get too involved to think rationally. He is a director of considerable skill who evokes stories out of moods, but this time, alas, he took the day off.
Roger.
Roger wasn't feeling it.
Roger took the day off.
On that note, let's talk about The Village.
So the original ending, we're supposed to just think that she like runs away.
Yeah, I guess she like does like she does in the movie, but like when she gets over the wall, that's like she like she gets like help from a truck driver, and then that's the end of the movie.
That's actually not. I don't feel like that's as good of an ending as we get here.
No, I agree.
And in fact, she's blind, and one of the interesting like ambiguities about the ending is what is she gonna have understood about like what she encounters when
I
she
think her
back?
dad or it is her dad who sends her, right?
Yeah.
Very intentionally did not send well, I guess he does send people with her, but they end up not going through with it.
Isn't it like Jesse Eisenberg that goes with her?
No,
It's not Jesse Eisenberg.
It is the dumbass boyfriend of Michelle Williams from Dawson's Creek.
Yeah, what a twerp. He totally bails on Dallas.
Yeah. And I wonder if that was prepared. Like he specifically wanted the blind girl to go so that she would have to report back.
I don't know. At the ending, they're prepared, like the elders of the village, or at least some of them are prepared to realize that like this is the end of like our ruse. And then when Adrian Brody's character dies, they're like, "Oh, good, now we can continue the ruse." Like
we can keep lying to our children.
Yeah, we can keep.
Yeah,
until the next time somebody almost bleeds to death.
It needs like what is it? They need like penicillin or something like that, like something super basic.
I don't think it ever says it.
Yeah, but it's not like what else is he going to be grabbing in there? Like it's not like he's going to know that
it's like a blood transfusion or something.
But it's a little like glass vial of I don't know, magic medicine.
It looks like penicillin or something. I
don't
know how it's going to help. He got stabbed.
I do feel like that's actually kind of the twist, though, that like Joaquin Phoenix doesn't end up as the main character of this movie. Like there's a little bit of a psycho thing almost. The fact that he's just like incapacitated for like the second half of the movie.
Well, and he barely speaks too. Like he has other people like read his.
This was the first time I saw it, and that kind of I knew what the twist was, but I didn't realize that like Joaquin Phoenix was going to get sidelined for the
Well, it spends a great deal of time making you think it's like a marriage plot movie.
Yeah,
like every girl in town wants to get with Joaquin Phoenix, and then like
Lucius.
the second Lucius gets with his crush, like he gets stabbed.
Dude, I was almost out on this movie because I'm like, why are you turning down Judy Greer? Like
for real, her amazing the amazing like delivery of
that like the most intense proposal scene ever.
And he's just like looking at her, just kind of like, all right. I'm just like,
man,
man,
it's like smash cut to Judy Greer just weeping.
Yeah, it is great. Yeah. No, I like at that point I was like, fuck you, Joaquin Phoenix. And then he got stabbed. I was like, that's what you deserve, man. Turning down Judy Greer. You deserve to get stabbed by Adrian Brody and his deeply questionable acting choices in this movie.
No one mentions that in the early pans. Where was Roger Ebert's defense of the
there is, one of the I think more credible criticisms of Shyamalan is that he does not do a great job always with the mentally ill or mentally challenged.
Wait, you're telling me Split is not like a sensitive of mental illness?
Blew my mind.
And that's definitely, at least in terms of just like kind of the sort of the laziness of it, like it just feels a little bit like I don't know. It just all feels a little bit just like old fashioned, just like simple minded
He is
folks,
literally playing the village idiot.
Yeah.
How many times had y'all seen this prior to watching it for this episode?
Just one time before.
Second time for me.
Yeah, second time.
I watched it in a high school English class for some reason. I don't know why.
Was it related to the Crucible by any chance?
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
I was in the Crucible in high school, but that was
which role did you
later. Play? I was John Proctor.
Oh my gosh.
Or not no, Reverend. I was Reverend Hale.
That's the better choice.
I had to stand. I just had to stand there and be like act aghast.
Yeah. I denounce these proceedings.
These witches. Anyways, and then I had seen it like once previously, like while going through all of Shyamalan's movies and doing my tourist due diligence.
Did you guys see the trailer for this movie when it first came out?
I do remember that.
I undoubtedly did.
Trailer very scary.
I remember. Yeah, I remember.
It's scary.
Yeah, I remember finding the trailer very scary. But I was also like a child who like did not watch scary movies. But there's no way the trailer was selling you on anything but a horror movie. Which this very much is not.
I remember also being like really freaked out by the poster for it. I remember seeing the poster, and it's just like this piece of paper. It says, "Let the bad color not be seen. It attracts them. Never enter the woods. Heed the warning bell." But it's got a very like Blair Witch vibe.
Yeah,
even it's like it's something. It's not. It's honestly it's like the font. And is freaky to me. It's something about the font that they use. But I remember also like anytime the commercial came on TV, just like hiding my head in my hands.
I remember like they used the shot of Bryce Dallas Howard like falling into that sinkhole as though somebody was pulling her down into it. And like I also remember they used the shot of like when Michael Pitt is like up in the little like scout tower and he like opens the like trap door below him and they see the, what do they call them, the ones we speak not of,
something really clunky like that.
So good. He sees one of those things like scurrying below him, and I remember the trailer making me think like, oh, this is about the crazy monsters who live in the ground or something, and the movie's not that.
Just damn ground monsters.
Well, those we don't speak of is the nomenclature.
Those we don't speak of.
They who must not be named.
That's a good kind of segue into like while watching this, I can kind of understand why people probably got really upset with this movie, because you're right. It has like spooky parts, but it's not really that scary. It's not
autumnal.
Yeah, it's more of like this like kind of community drama thing that like on that level, I'm like, yeah, this is pretty solid. Like I enjoy this, but if you're going in like kind of like on the edge, like waiting for, hey, when's this, like, well, not only when's the twist, but like when's the scary stuff gonna start? It's probably a very frustrating experience.
Yeah, and I think like I go back and forth on that twist. Like I remember reading, I don't remember what, this is a professional critic who said this, is that this critic thought that the village would work so much better if it wasn't a twist, but rather you had the knowledge from the beginning of the movie. And I go back and forth on that because I think that
irony,
I think that like the dramatic irony could be like really interesting, and the movie could use more time to like draw out like the kind of implications of like, what we learn in the twist, that like this is like an enclave of like, back to the woods, like, modern people or whatever. But I also think that like it's a really important arc in the movie that like you have the moment of discovery at the same moment that like the character does. And like, I don't know, that feels like a meaningful structure in the movie, and not simply like,
Well, I think you can have that experience of the movie by simply rewatching it.
Well, right.
Like,
yeah.
They don't need to change anything about the movie for you to have that experience.
Yeah. And I get like in a way that like people got tired of M. Night Shyamalan movies always having a twist at the end. but like this is one of his sturdier uses of a twist because it is like a genuinely meaningful thing that happens to the characters. It's not simply like a and it's like structurally thoughtful. It's not simply like a tossed off like, well, I guess there's got to be a twist at the end, which you could arguably say about like I don't know, Split or something like that. Whereas like with this, like the entire movie like only really makes sense through the lens of what we learn in the last few minutes.
Yeah,
and
it's all built like backwards, right? Like he had to figure out like what is going to be the truest reality that these characters are living in order to start writing the movie.
I also think like the twist is not like, I feel like with Sixth Sense, the twist is so I don't know, just like rewatching that, and I think maybe I said this on the episode, but something that just really struck me about The Sixth Sense is that it just feels very much like a home video era movie of just like something where you're like, you watch it, your mind is blown by the twist, and then you immediately want to rewatch it to like try to poke holes in it or to see like, because it's very like the twist is woven in visually with where, when you do rewatch it, you can see of like, oh, he doesn't interact with anybody else. He's not in the same space as anybody else. And it's like, there are certain maybe things that you rethink, but it's not the same. Like the twist is not determine the movie the same way, like visually, I feel like it's much more what does it mean for these characters.
Well, it's like thematically significant more than it is like, because like it doesn't really change anything for the characters who don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it's not like a gotcha in the same way that The Sixth Sense is, where it's like, whoa, it's just kind of like, this is sort of like, I feel like it's more like about the potential like betrayal or the feeling of being lied to, the feeling of like being gaslit by like your parents, and less like, let's like, crack the code or whatever. It's like an emotional twist.
How did y'all how much did the twist seem like it was being foregrounded by the movie to y'all rewatching it? Because I couldn't think about anything but all the stuff on the set that looked like it was made in the modern day. Like all of these houses look like 1890s houses you would order from Lowe's or something like that.
I wondered about that because like especially like the masonry on like the stone houses and stuff like that look very clean. I don't know, like I'm curious if that's even like a choice. Like that might just be like incidental to like the construction of the sets in 2003.
It's possible. I don't know.
But yeah, I do think when you start thinking about it on that level, it's like this experiment probably wouldn't get very far. Like because
there would be a plane. Like,
well, they even talk about that at the end of the movie. There's some government thing, some communication with the government.
Yeah, I was like,
they would have to learn a lot of skills,
Yeah. Well, so this is like one of the things I was thinking about a lot in this movie, and one of the things that was kind of moving and like engaging to me about this movie is kind of like there was a period in my life where I was homeschooled, and like if you know anything about homeschoolers, especially like conservative Christian homeschoolers, which I was around, like they fetishize this kind of like 19th century way of life for a lot of reasons that are political. You can imagine like no big government, or like Christianity had kind of cultural hegemony, or whatever. There are reasons like that, but I think that there is also like a genuine nostalgia for like a more embodied, like earthy way of living. And like almost unanimously, I feel like the people who have those feelings do not they have not really reckoned with how genuinely difficult it is to truly do that. And so you get like basically a bunch of people living in the suburbs, but they're like making bread and maybe composting or something. And
let me churn some butter.
And like, but there is like that sort of like impulse of like, we must like sequester our children from like modern life, like the excesses of modern life, or the degeneracy of modern society or whatever you want to call it. And like, I think that this movie is such an interesting like thought experiment for like, what if that was taken to even more like unhinged, you know, I mean, because like the amount, like you guys mentioned, they like pay off the government to like have the FAA reroute planes around like the the amount of control, like people talk about like high control religious environments, which is like a lot of people would consider like, you know, fundamentalist Christianity being like that, but like none of them had so much control that they could they like technology was cowed to their very whims.
I
Like
do
in this movie.
almost kind of wish in some ways, like you saying that kind of the movie like opened with the twist or something like that. I
See,
don't know,
that's
just
what I
like
think would be useful about that, is because you could explore some of those tensions a little bit more than the movie does.
I also think one of the things too that's just very interesting about this movie, and it's very just like fitting of Shyamalan, because he's very, you know, he's a kind of interested in morals and humans. That like there is no, they don't really draw out any like political sort of subtext with these characters at all. Like you gotta like these people have to be like crazy racist, you know? It's like,
absolutely.
you know, and it's just like the movie doesn't really go there at all. It just sort of like casts them as like people who had good intentions but were just like faced with a difficult, you know, reality or
I
whatever.
think
Even the
they
reasons.
left Philadelphia. There's
Yeah.
no way that they're cool.
Yeah.
Well, even the reasons that they give for like the specific like ways that they, it's just this kind of generic violence. Like, oh, my
Like
brother
Death Wish.
was gunned down like in a drive-by or something like that. But like if you talk to people who are actual separatists, it's like, you know, I mean, like the conservative Christian homeschooling movement comes out of Brown versus Board of Education, right? Like, you know, the kind of panic that causes all these Christians to like sequester themselves educationally is that, oh my God, there's like black kids coming to our school. And yeah, you're right. This movie doesn't deal with that, even though it is
But
like,
I mean, isn't the fear of crime like very much a racialized
yeah, it is
fear in
and
American
also
politics?
it's really interesting too, like William Hurt's character being like a professor of American history.
Yeah.
And also too, I don't know, I haven't really thought about this, but just, you know, coming smack dab in the Bush era, I feel like there's some, you know, you could do a kind of interesting
Yeah.
Hoberman kind of political reading.
Well, that's I mean that's kind
There's
of
a
what
Zizek essay about it.
Makes sense.
I mean that's kind of how I was thinking about it, like in terms of this. It's if it's present day, it's 2004 for all intents and purposes, and so it's, you know, they'd been there for a while, but like in terms of like the writing, it's coming a couple years after 9/11. And it seems, you know, it seems like a natural, like, oh, like, you know, 9/11 happens, let's sequester ourselves away from the world that's becoming more and more.
Man, if only the United States had sequestered themselves away from the world after 9/11.
Double feature, 2004 double feature of The Village and Team America World Police.
Yeah, wow. The two genders of 2004. Yeah, I don't know. It is interesting that he mentions like, well, you can't protect people from everything as like his kind of thesis for the movie, like Shyamalan in that quote, because like I'm kind of this movie to me is like what you talked about, Nadine, is this intense feeling of betrayal that you feel when you realize that like in the interest of protection, this enormous ruse has been created. And like, I mean, I think you could broaden that to like a geopolitical thing. I mean, the United States, I mean, being a student of history, you know, the act of learning history is basically one reveal after another about the lies of like what the United States is like official narratives on things is. But
I guess also too, like the invention of boogeymen, you know,
yeah,
very you know, fitting with the times.
Yeah. And that the boogeymen are in fact the people in charge. Like it's like a, you know, that's what, but like, I don't know. There's this weird tension in the movie about how they just want to protect people, like protect their children. and that's always like the bullshit like excuse for bad politics as well. Like won't someone think about the children or whatever? Because it's like really
is the newest craze.
is what
parents' rights is
absolutely parents' rights to sequester their children in a fake 19th century commune.
Amish style.
Yeah. Hell yeah. But like
trad wife.
Yeah, like there's all this shit. And the fact that it's all left to implication, I guess, is just kind of like maybe like Shyamalan's like allegorical impulse. But it also makes the movie just really interesting to wrestle with because of like all this kind of unstated and like stuff that's roiling beneath the surface, intentionally or not.
Shyamalan really doesn't strike me as a very political filmmaker, like throughout his entire career. I mean, Knock at the Cabin is engaging with a lot of that stuff. I'm sure we'll have plenty to say when we get there.
It's like it was very sort of moralist, humanist, sort of like environmentalism too. I feel like also is like it's very kind of 1990s in a lot of ways. Like, I feel like
well, and I don't mean that like he had a political agenda, but like but like even some of the like moral and ethical questions are kind of left as subtext for a lot of the movie. You know, like and the fact that like that's all, you know, kind of just left there as like stuff that the movie is not directly dealing with is kind of interesting for a movie about a group of people who themselves don't want to kind of deal with like the really upsetting stuff. And I mean, like this movie doesn't interrogate like the system, it merely shows the system for like you know, it just reveals like the origins of the system, and you're kind of left to think about like is like, you know, what are the implications of this and like how horrifying is it or not.
It's also interesting that there is no explicit reference made to Christianity at any point in this movie. This is like secular Puritanism, right? Like I think the main thing that this movie makes me think of and what we've been talking about is like evangelical Christianity and the various ways in which parents create bubbles for their children to live in that will eventually kind of be popped. But you know, in the world and the logic of this movie, the people who did this were not motivated by any sort of religious conviction. It was just like this desire to live more simply, quote unquote.
Making a bigger case for the racism.
But I think that even if you talk to evangelical Christians or fundamentalist Christians, they're inextricable, right? Like the degeneracy of like the modern urban environment that they see is, they will describe it as being that, but when you push them, it's also like a kind of spiritual rot in, you know, whatever, like
Babylon,
that sort of thing. And like, so like I think those impulses exist simultaneously. Like there's a secular read for conservative Christians that's just like kind of materialist, but then there's a kind of more spiritual one, and but for that dichotomy doesn't exist within like religious circles. And I mean, there's no religious practice in this movie, but I feel like that if you asked like, you know, why do you evangelical Christian living in like the suburbs, why do you fear cities? Like, why do you think that that's unsafe? Why do you think that they're immoral? The first things that they're going to say are the same things that the people in this movie said about like how there's shootings and there's crime and all that sort of stuff. Like it's all the same like material concerns, and the evangelicals like spiritualize it to give it like metaphysical significance.
Right. But I guess what I'm saying is like, it is as though the characters in this movie intentionally set out to create a society in which religion did not exist.
Oh yeah.
You know, which just so strange, considering.
Well, their religion is the creatures, right? Like, I mean, that's like the stand-in for faith, right? Is the kind of orchestrated, like, because there's a series of rituals associated with like how to repel the creatures and all this sort of stuff that is mainly like a method of control. And I mean, if you're looking at allegorically, you can look at like the kind of frameworks of certain like, you know, religious movements as having these kind of metaphysical claims, and they are spiritual claims, but on a level of utility. What they're there for is that they're easier to control. You know, it's
right.
If God is going to send you to hell for sinning, that's a way of controlling people's behavior, as well as like a spiritual claim.
On Letterboxd, Nadine referred to this as her version of The Witch. Does that hold up?
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't remember anything about The Witch, honestly. I don't.
Andrew's
Sorry
a
to,
resident witch expert.
sorry to
I teach
the
The Witch every
eggers
year, so
heads.
yeah.
I can see some similarities.
I think that like watching The Witch so much is part of why I'm clocking all these buildings as like modern constructions, because The Witch like goes to such great pains to have everything made with like the same nails that they used in the 1600s or whatever.
What it reminds me of, I can't remember the name of it, but there was this like reality show on PBS in the mid 2000s where they I think it was called like Frontier House or something like that, where they just sent like normal people and had them pretend to be like pioneers and build a house, and it was just like people just like complaining mostly.
Yeah, because that stuff fucking sucks. Like, farm work is terrible. I'm sorry, it sucks.
But no one's even doing farm work here. Like,
yeah, that's true.
How does this community sustain itself? Where's the food?
Maybe
come from?
Like people to come in from. Maybe it's like a Walden Pond sort of situation where people from the outside bring in supplies.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering the whole time. Is somebody making trips to town once a week?
Because at one point, the creatures, which is just them, slaughters all the cows or whatever. So you're like, why did you do that? Now you got no cows. Damn, the flaws. And I'm telling you, at least one airplane flies over there, freaks them all out.
I want to know who designed, like who in the community designed the creatures.
Dude, those ones are freaky looking though.
Yeah, they
not a horror movie, but they're scary.
They're pretty cool. Who designed the creatures and how much Lovecraft were they reading? Yeah.
Probably a lot given the implicit racism that they have.
Yeah. Any final thoughts before we wrap up on The Village?
I do want to. So before break, we said that we were going to talk in part 2 about like the weird relationship the 2000s like kind of film intelligentsia has with like horror at the time, and I feel like Shyamalan is tied up in that somehow, because like at the beginning of the decade he's like this kind of anointed like, oh, this is the thinking man's like, you know, finally a horror movie director who gets it sort of thing, and by the end of the decade he's got, you know, The Happening, you know, which is just
like are any of the first leg of Shyamalan movies horror movies?
Sixth Sense, I think, is definitely pitched as a horror movie.
Is a horror movie.
Okay, I don't think any of them actually are horror movies, but in terms of how people understood them to be, they were horror movies, you know. And I think also The Signs like has like things that are meant to be like horror movie-esque, you know. Like I remember reading like listicles where there'd be like scariest moments of all time in movies, and it would always have the little signs like birthday party home video footage where the alien like jumps in front or whatever. And I think like he was widely regarded as like someone who like was in, I mean, that Ebert review references it as he's like a director who knows how to do horror movies. Anyway,
the original elevated horror.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's it. And then I don't know, like Shyamalan is also like one of these guys who's got the kind of like film Twitter reclamation campaign in the same way that like Rob Zombie does, or like the Eli Roth movies from the 2000s do, or something like that, you know, where
that's mostly just me.
It's not just you though. It's like a lot of people. I mean, you probably started like with the empty man. You're the snowball roller.
Somebody's got to do it.
But there's just this like really interesting, like, and if you look at the horror movies that were well received back then, it's not like that they're forgotten, but it's also not like the ones that like people like at least critically are most interested in now. And it's like these kind of reclaimed movies that get a lot of like the, you know, I don't know, there's just something interesting about like that kind of cultural tide, you know. The torture porn thing was like not with the Shyamalan, but it was like I think for a lot of people, like it was like the 2000s were a bad time for horror, but now like a lot of interesting critical work is being done surrounding like kind of these 2000s movies. I think Shyamalan has benefited from that because even though he wasn't lumped in with like torture porn or whatever, like the movies that people kind of turned on him for, like The Village or The Happening or whatever, have proven to have a lot of legs in the long term.
Well, he's really never been chasing trends
Yeah.
in his career in the way that like so many of those movies fit into these very popular trends of the time, whether it's be torture porn or jump scare heavy movies or whatever. And yeah, I think that's the kind of filmmaker who tends to get more like reclaimed later. Somebody who's kind of like in their own lane, doing their own thing that people don't really get for a while.
Yeah, well, but when they do get it, like I was just thinking about the Rob Zombie Halloweens, and like that's totally him doing his own thing with Halloween, like except for like the few moments where he's kind of like doing homage to the original, like, and people didn't like that, and they said specifically like, oh, giving Michael Myers a backstory is a mistake and things like that. Like, I think one of the things people in the reclamation era of like the 2000s horror have realized is that in a lot of these kind of movies that people rejected at the time, there is like an interesting perspective that those movies have that wasn't recognized at the time because it was perceived as being part of like a trend. And I don't know, like The Village, those reviews of The Village are interesting because like people were creating a narrative around Shyamalan where he's like a horror director who always has a twist at the end, and that's the lens that they viewed the Village through. And that's there in this movie, but there's like all this other interesting stuff that like if you're not in the midst of that being the dominant narrative about the movie kind of comes out. I don't know. Maybe that's just the story of people engaging with art, is that like things reveal themselves about works of art as time goes on. But I don't know.
I think that it is interesting to think about, though. I feel like almost part of maybe why people positioned, I mean, part of it was just like the marketing, but I almost feel like if there's part of like people wanted Shyamalan to be like a horror filmmaker, almost in that sort of like elevated horror impulse of like, oh, we have so many of like these, disreputable types of horror movies. We need something that's like good real cinema, and so Shyamalan is going to give us like the good horror movies, and then he doesn't really give us horror movies per se, and so it's kind of like rejecting him based on that sort of I don't know, maybe I'm wrong there, but I kind of feel like that almost, at least with somebody, I don't know, I could see somebody with like Roger Ebert sort of wanting that, just being like, we need an antidote to all this torture porn nonsense.
Well, and Shyamalan does have that kind of like, at least technically, like a classical sensibility to him that like a lot of the kind of contemporary horror.
Yeah, nobody mentioned. I don't think we really talked about Roger Deakins.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. Yeah,
amazing cinematography.
Especially love the scene where Joaquin Phoenix and Bryce Dallas Howard confess their love for each other, like all as one, like really tight. It's kind of like a close up, but it's also a 2-shot at the same time. Like you're just getting like the edges of their faces for like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, they mentioned it in the New York Times review, but also James Newton Howard's score.
Very good.
With fantastic.
Specifically the there's like a really prominent like a solo string that plays throughout, and there's like I was looking it up, there's like a person attached to that. Solo violinist Hilary Hahn is doing a bunch of the like the violin work there, and it's like just a single, like rather than an orchestral thing, it's like a single violin.
Interesting. Yeah, that I'm imagining that's what's going on in the scene where like Joaquin Phoenix rescues Bryce Dallas Howard from the monster, and like they like make a break for the basement. There's like this really beautiful like arpeggio section that I just thought was super impressive.
I think this is the most, I mean, if we're talking about Shyamalan, I think this is one of the most like handsome movies that he made. Like in terms of like just like everything feels like, not in the kind of like negative way people mean this, but everything feels very like prestigious in this movie. Like it's just like sumptuous textures to everything. You know, like how everything looks. I don't know if it's his actually most expensive movie, but it kind of looks like his most expensive movie.
That's why I say, like, if you get past the whole, like, oh, this is supposed to be a horror movie, if you just look at it as like this kind of community drama movie, it's incredibly compelling because you have all of these like forces at work that are just making it look so, as you said, prestigious. It's really good. It's my final thought. It's really good.
It's a good movie, yeah.
The Village is good.
All right. Well, that'll wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Instagram at @Cinematary and on Letterboxd, letterboxd.com/Cinematary, where we post all the movies that we talked about in this episode. If you would like to support the show, patreon.com/Cinematary. If you want to give us $1, that's cool. If you want to donate your entire paycheck, that's also great. Whatever you want to give, we're happy to have it. Thanks to our patrons, Cam, Ron Hayes, Tanner Huskins, Teresa Marsati, and Tyler Chandler. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Next week, we're going to continue our next episode. We're going to continue our M. Night series with 2008's The Happening.
I'm so excited. I've never seen it.
Oh, wow.
That's good.
I'm pumped
What
for
a
some Wahlberg
what a
action.
descent into like just weird surreal Shyamalan-isms from The Sixth Sense to The Village to The Happening. It's like
And
speedrunning.
also M. Night like trying to get more Wahlbergs involved. You know, he had Donnie and Sixth Sense, and now he's bringing on Mark.
Yeah.
You're not paying attention to the Wahlberg inclusion.
The Wahlberg creep.
It's Wahlberg's all the way down.
Yeah, seriously. All right. Until then, thanks y'all for listening.
Bye.